And now I'm going to share my screen. All right, guys, so here it is, our last day of remote learning. So on the main page here has been everything we've done this week, recorded each day. The Teams link has been here each day. Today's link, today's recording will go up after this class, but I also added this section right here to the main page. You can find the project worked on this week to download here, along with the code for the main class, Learn Graphics, Graphics 1, 2, and 3. So if you want, you can click on the word here.
Mr.
And
Watts,
you can actually,
you're not screen sharing.
I'm not screen sharing. Really? Is that for everybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's try that again. Let's try that again, because it said I was screen sharing. How about now?
You're good now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me restate what I was saying. So all week, on the main page of my site has been this set of links to the Teams meeting and each recorded class. And after today's class, the recording will get linked in there. But I also added this section that you guys notice, what's he talking about, is links to, as you can see, the main project along with all the code. So if you, for example, click here, you can actually go and download the entire project this week that I've been working on. And for you 30S students, it's the entire set of examples for the whole course, okay? But also all these graphics examples. If you don't need the entire project and you're doing some adapted version of it, you just need some code, you can also, for example, click on, say, Graphics 2 or Graphics 1 that we worked on yesterday, and you can go in and find the specific code that you need there, and you can copy and paste it. So that's now all up on the main page, but it's also available on the Computer Science and the Computer Science 40 and 30S pages. If you scroll down, the weekly events, which I've been keeping every week back since September, a little journal of what we do each week, and you scroll down to the last week, week 17, okay? The same links are also here. So you don't have to go to the main page. You can also just go to our Computer Science 30S page and you can find the same stuff there, okay? So it's all there, whether you've been doing the example this week or not, or next week when you guys get back to class. If you want to access some of that for use, it's all there for you, okay? All right, so that's all there. What I want to do today is just focus on, obviously, what we're going to work on here with Graphics 3, okay? So we're going to use a hybrid approach. We're going to use the editor to do a lot of the visual design, and then we're going to put in some code as well. So the first thing I'm going to do with the editor, which I didn't do in Graphics 2, is, for example, if I put a button on the design, then I go and put a second button on the design, sometimes this editor will end up moving things around and resizing and repositioning things in a way that I don't like. It does try to help you with these little sort of guides that they look like, they're supposed to look like springs, right? So they're sort of springing it in place to hold it there. But sometimes I don't like that. Sometimes I don't want to have these things helping me out. Sometimes I want to be in full control of where I position things. And you might remember we coded it that way, but I'm going to show you how you can do that with the designer now. In the designer, you can take your form or your frame or your container, you can right click on it, set layout. By default in the NetBeans designer, it uses this thing called free design, which is a NetBeans specific way of laying out everything. Then it includes all the ones we saw yesterday, right? Those ones that I showed you in the presentation, but it also includes the one we used yesterday, the null layout, which is essentially to say, you know what, don't worry about where everything goes. I'm going to show you where stuff goes. So that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to go to set layout to null layout. Right click, set layout, null layout. Now when I go and put a button on there, it's not gonna, you're not gonna see the little springies pop up anymore. It's gonna position stuff wherever I want it to go. Okay, so let's build a design here. I'm gonna put on a button, and in the text of that button, it's gonna say foreground color. Okay, so the foreground color. I'm going to need more of these buttons. 3 more. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Foreground color. I'm going to have background color. Okay. I'm going to have, why didn't that change? Oh, so I put it in the wrong place. Background color. I'm going to have clear. And this one's going to be starburst. Come on, walks. You can starburst. Okay, so those are going to be my 4 buttons on there. I'm going to place a label on there. Into that label, I'm going to put the text brush size. I'm going to make it bigger so you can see it. And beside that, I'm going to put something a little fancier. I'm going to put this thing called a spinner. I'm going to put a spinner right there. A spinner is, as you can see right here, it's like a text box for numbers, but you can also control the numbers with the little up-down arrows. So I'm going to put a spinner right there. Then I'm going to put a radio button up top here. A radio button is one of these things. Oh, oops. A radio button is used like a checkbox, but you can only pick one of them. And I'm going to need a bunch of these. But let me just change the text of it first. It's going to say filled oval. And then copy, paste. That's 2. Paste. 2, 3, 4. 2 more. Okay, so that's what I'm going to have. And then I'm just going to sort of tighten everything up. Okay, and there's one other thing I'm going to add on here, and I'm going to change these names here in a second. But this time I'm going to get it from up here. The concept of a container we know is a frame, but you can have containers inside of containers. So I'm going to use this thing here called a panel. I'm going to put that on there. Stretch it out. And with the panel, I'm also going to give it a border, just so I can see the edge of it. To do the border, I'm going to click on the little ellipse, and I'm going to use an etched border. Let me show you that again. Put on a panel. I'm going to go to border. I'm going to click on the little button right there, or I think you can just double click this. Oh, maybe not. And then right here, you can see different types of borders, and I'm going to use just the etched border, which is just a simple little line. This is going to be my drawing area. I'm going to be drawing in this area. This is going to be my tools area where I pick a tool to draw with. Okay. All right. So what are these things going to be? Filled oval. Change the text here. Oval. And I just heard someone logging in. So let me jump back here. Okay. And I'm going to update some attendance. Okay. Okay, so filled open oval, where was it? Filled rectangle. Open rectangle. 3D rectangle. And arc. Okay, so that's what I'm going to put for my radio buttons. Filled oval, filled rectangle, open rectangle, 3D rectangle, and arc. It can give us lots of tools and lots of different examples of different ways we can use this program. Now, you might remember that way back on Monday, we edited this thing called Learn Graphics, that it would launch Graphics 3, okay? For now, I'm gonna comment out Graphics 1 and 2, okay? I'm just gonna comment them out because I think I'd rather just sort of see Graphics 3 right away, okay? I'm also going to temporarily over here in Computer Science 30S. I know we had this whole fancy thing here, but I'm going to just add a quick line of code here to just do this new Learn Graphics. And again, I don't expect you guys to necessarily do this. And then get out of here. So that, no, I won't do that. Let's comment this out. Because right now I just want to see Graphics 3. I don't want to see Graphics 1 and 2. And if I end up running it, I don't see it at all. Because as you now know, we have to make it visible. We have to make Graphics 3 visible. So I'm going to go into the source code. I'm going to go into Graphics 3 source code and add a line of code here. This dot set visible true. Okay. You might remember we did the exact same thing with Graphics 2. Although we built the design, we ended up adding that line in there. So there's a comment in Graphics 2 to help explain what's going on there. Now, one thing about Graphics 2, since we're now just taking a look back at Graphics, there was all this generated code that's in here. It generates code for you. So in Graphics 3, I added a little comment here that says, note, NetBeans Visual Designer adds the code below, and by the code below, I mean that code below is this generated code, which cannot be edited. You cannot edit the code that the designer builds. It also adds code like this constructor above, which you can edit, and I misspelled edit, likely. Or you can add to that code, which I just did, or you could delete stuff, okay? Don't delete this line or it's gonna destroy your thing. The generated can be seen by clicking the little plus sign right here. You can actually go in and look at this code, but you can't actually change the code. Now, going back to Graphics 2, you may have noticed, or maybe you didn't, that somewhere in Graphics 2, was a version of public static void main. Okay, so in Graphics 3, I've added a comment about that. Right here, it says, NetBeans Visual Designer, when you add a JFrame, adds a version of public static void main. That main method, though, can be edited and it can be removed. So here in Graphics 3, I actually went in and selected main and deleted it. I'm not going to delete it from Graphics 2, just so you know it's there, but I deleted it from Graphics 3. And then I had one more little comment. The NetBeans Visual Designer also adds a bunch of code for each component. So now that we've added a bunch of buttons and a bunch of radio buttons, every time you add a component, it essentially creates them like global variables, and those also can't be edited. Okay. So now I'm going to hit play again. And hopefully Graphics 3 will appear. And it did appear. You're like, well, where is it? It's actually right up here. Here it is. I have to stretch it out, but it's actually there. You can see now it's actually there. Okay. So once you use the null design, okay, which is what I did, I made this a null design. I now no longer have the size automated for me. I have to set the size. I'm going to make a little adjustment here because buttons were a little there. So let me show you again. I'm going to hit play. And I have to stretch this out. that I can see the design. Well, I don't want to do that. I want to be in control of that, okay? So in order to do that, I need to know the size of this thing. And unfortunately, it's a little bit of a guessing game here. If you put your mouse sort of in the corner, it might give you a general idea of about how big this is. So I'm going to go back to the code and add this set size. And I'm going to give it those two numbers. And I unfortunately didn't remember them, so I'm just going to go back. And it's 833, 395. 33, 395. Set visible true. I'm also going to do a couple other things that I'm just going to borrow from either Graphics 2, or I think even better than Graphics 2, is I'm going to borrow some of this code from Graphics 1, where we did the code ourselves. Because in Graphics 1, we actually made a thing called set container. So I could do the title, I could set it resizable, I could center it on the screen, I could do all of those things. Make this Graphics 3, make it not resizable, center it on the screen, and hopefully that will all now apply to Graphics 3. This is that hybrid approach. You can see here it's still not quite big enough. I got to make it bigger than these numbers here. Let me up them by, say, 20 pixels. 53, and that'll make that like 405. Let's see what that looks like. So it's a little kind of guessing. So the width is pretty good, but the height still needs to get a lot bigger. Let's try 425. Not bad. I'm going to make it a little bit more. Let's try 430. And this will be a little bit of guess and check on your part. Okay, that's pretty good. There's my Graphics 3 with my radio buttons, my spinner, my buttons, my drawing area, the resizable's gone, the title's in there. It's all looking great at this point, okay? So the hybrid approach means, what that means is you use the designer combined own code. Make the user interface what you want. That's what I wanted. I wanted it to be a certain way, right? I wanted it to look the way I wanted it to look. Okay, so the designer gives me some ability to do that. And then the other part is me actually writing the code. But what I wouldn't want to do necessarily with this particular program is write all the code myself. Because if we look in generated code, I would have had to write all of this. I would have had to figure out for each button exactly where the X, Y, width, and height would have to go. For every single thing, I would have had to put in all of that stuff. I would have had to create my own border. I would have had to do all of that. And that's just more time than I wanted to spend to build this thing. So in that way, the designer really did, in fact, give me a lot of advantage over hard coding all of this myself. All right. Next up is I'm actually going to use the Navigator here. When you're in the designer mode, the Navigator isn't going to show you code like it does when you're in code mode. In code mode, the Navigator shows you all your methods and stuff like that. But when you're in design mode, what the Navigator shows you is it shows you as well all your design elements, right? All the things that you built onto your design. But what it also gives me the ability to do is right-click on each one and change its name. So this is something you would have done if you took the grade 10 computer science course, is you would have named all your objects, names your buttons, names of your this and that. And I even suggested using a 3-letter sort of prefix, which is still a good idea, but I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to just keep it simple. So for example, for this radio button here, notice how that one's not the first one, so I can also move them around. I can slide them into different orders here. So this one, I'm going to change its name, okay, to filled oval, okay, and this is my radio button. So I'm just going to call it filled oval. This one, change the variable name, open oval. are variable names, right? So I have to use my camel casing to name these. 3, I want to get the order the same. Change variable name, filled rectangle. Open. Rectangle. With that one, I have to actually type the word 3 because just again, this is something that you should know from this course is you can't start a name with a number. And then finally arc. Okay, so that was me naming my radio buttons. Let me name my panel. Draw area. Let me name my spinner. Brush size. My label is the least important thing to name. I'm just going to call it information. And now my buttons. And again, they're in a different order than the way I actually designed them. Because I copy pasted, but here we go. Foreground color. I can also name objects by right-clicking on them directly on the design. I don't have to use the Navigator for this. Background color. Clear. Starburst. Okay. But the Navigator does give me a quick view of all my objects, all my visual components, controls, or stuff. This, again, for those of you who did the grade 10 course, this is going to feel very familiar to you. So there's all my objects, all my buttons, all my labels, spinner, radio buttons. Everything's named now. So now I can get to the coding part of it. And again, depending on what you want to do for a final project, this might be a very good idea. When we did graphics 2, we didn't bother doing any of this. We did our design, but we didn't bother naming stuff. We left it just as the default names that NetBeans gave it. And that's going to be okay too. I'm not going to be marking for that in this course like I was in the grade 10 course. It's not as important a feature because this course isn't as about design in that same way. All right. So at this point now, we can get to the code for this Photoshop program. So I'm going to switch to source code now. Okay. So the source code for this graphics 3. Okay. I know we've already added some source code in there. That was just so that we could actually see our design to make sure it looked good, which it does. It looks great. Okay. And now we can be in control of what we want here. So what we're going to start with is we're going to build some what you might call global variables. They're essentially also they're properties of this class. Starting with some constants. Okay, which again you should know from this course. So the global variables below this line. Constants will include a private, final, int, minimum equals 2. Now what's this for? This is for the brushes. So when our users are scrolling down the brush size, they can't go lower than 2. Can't have a brush size negative number or even a brush of size 0. I mean, we could even set it to 1. That'd be a really small brush, but I'm just going to start it off at 2. Okay. And then I'm going to also make a maximum size as well. So a minimum and a maximum. And my maximum, I'm just going to make 200. Okay. Also for the brushes. So a minimum of 2, a maximum of 200. I'm also going to have one called change. And I'm going to set that one to 5. This is also for the brushes, okay? What that one represents is when I change the brush, when I make it bigger or smaller, it's not going to change by 1 necessarily. It's going to change by 5. Because to go between 2 and 200, that would take a long, anyways, you'll get the idea. And then the last one, private, final, will be a string array that I'm just going to call brushes. And for this one, I'm going to lay them out in the array. So these are all the choices the user has. So they can choose a filled rectangle. They can choose a open rectangle. Capitalize this. They can choose a filled, sorry, this should be filled oval, open oval, filled rectangle, and open rectangle. Copy paste is so going to be our friends here. They can choose 3D rectangle. And finally, they can choose arc. This is going to match up with what we have over here for their choices of brushes. So that's going to be an array of brushes that they can use. So all of these constants are for the brushes. So I'm not going to bother with those. So all of those constants are for the brushes. Now that we made constants, let's make some variables. These are primitive variables. Okay. So private string brush. Which brush will they choose from this array of brushes? Private int size. Which size of brush will they choose? The other one's going to be for when we move stuff around. Our current X value. And underneath that, our current Y value. These will be variables, primitive variables, that track some important information in this program. But we're also going to make some class object level variables. They're non-primitive. They're a little more advanced than just integers and booleans and doubles. So we're going to make a private color variable. Now, color is obviously not some simple variable. So this one will have to be imported. So I'm going to click and import color. Now, you'll see that line gets added up here. This required import program. And you can see what we talked about yesterday, that it's coming from the AWT library, not the swing library. Color, and this will be our foreground. And one for the background. And now we're going to make a private graphics object called graphics. Since we're going to be drawing in this thing, we need to draw with graphics. So we're going to need to import this. Now, be careful when you import. Sometimes there's going to be multiple choices here. We want to choose the top one here. So make sure it's importing the correct one. Okay, so we've got color, we've got graphics. Okay, now to use the spinner, we're going to use something called a spinner number model. This is an interesting one. We're going to import that. And we'll just call it model. Okay. This one comes from a different library. It's coming from the Swing library. So when you start using some of these objects in the designer, they might be a little more complicated. So you might have to ask me, how do I use this exactly? If I don't know, we're going to have to maybe look it up online, or you're going to look it up online to kind of get a feel for these. And that might be part of your decision making when you do the final project. Sort of, is this thing a little more complicated than I need for this particular problem? So foreground, background graphics, and model for a spinner. And then this one is going to be a timer. Timers are really cool stuff. And if you did the grade 10 course, you know about this. So unfortunately, there's no visual timer that you can draw on there like you could in Visual Studio. Timers are all done with code in Java. And as you can see, when you go to import it, there are lots of choices. Each one of those has its advantages. So I'm going to choose the top one for the timer, which comes from this JAVX Swing library. So it's an extension library of the core of Java that comes from Swing. So those are going to be a little more of the complicated objects we're going to use in this example. Okay, let me update GitHub. Commit. Okay, because I've already put in quite a bit of code, and it's just going to get more and more here as we go further. So if you're at home and you're like, oh, how did he do that? How do I get that? Okay. So again, what I would suggest is you can just go to any of the pages. So if you're in Computer Science 40S, let's say, for example, you could go to your Computer Science 40S page, the one you've been using for the whole course, scroll down to week 17, and you got the links there. Or even easier, you can just go to my main page, mrwalks.wordpress.com, scroll down to period 3, and click on graphics 3 right here. So it should now show the code I literally just put up into GitHub a second ago. And there it is. So you can literally go and grab that code and bring it into your example. Okay. So here's graphics 3. You know what I'm going to do now? I'm going to take all of this code that I put in the constructor, and I'm going to remind you of Alt-Shift-M. I'm going to introduce a method that I'm just going to call setup. Setup is my own method that sets this up, okay? In other words, setup sets, okay, the properties of this, okay? It sets the properties of this form. It sets the size, the title, whether it's not recitable, centers it on the screen, and makes it visible. So I'm adding my own custom method call after this method call, which, by the way, that one is sitting in the uneditable area. That's where init components meet is. And by the way, init, this weird, like, what does that mean? INIT. I'm going to actually rename this method. And this, again, is a reminder of some of the things you can do with NetBeans, all located on that keyboard shortcuts card. On that keyboard shortcuts card, okay, are all these little tips that you can use for coding. And one of them, Control R, allows me to rename this init. And what init is short for is initialize. We're initializing something here, which means we're initializing it, okay? And I'm going to rename it again, initialize container. Okay? So this is me initializing the components. I didn't write that code. It did. This is my own custom method of me initializing the container. Okay, just to show you that, you know, we were already doing that. Okay. So now I want to write code for a bunch of the actual methods here. So for a bunch of these things here, I want to write code for them. So I'm going to make my life easier. I'm going to start with the buttons. Foreground color. Okay, what action is it going to do? Well, I'm going to make my own custom method just called set foreground. So I'm going to send it to my own custom set foreground method, and I'll use the light bulb to create it. It'll be somewhere on my code. There it is, set foreground. Okay. Now, notice where it placed this method. It placed it right at the bottom of our code, which is where it normally does. But this one that we just did, it put at the top of our code. Well, that's annoying. So I'm going to cut this, paste it down here. Okay. And put a little comment here that these are my custom methods that I wrote. And they're going to be below this line right here, right? So I'm going to make a little line here. And that's where all my custom methods go, like initialize container and the one that I'm going to write called set foreground. I'll get to that later. Okay. Oops, close graphics one now. So there we go. So when I click the button, it's going to jump to my own custom method, setting the foreground. Just like when yeah, you get the idea. If you want, you can also put your constants and stuff down there as well. You could maybe leave sort of all the designer code at the top and put your own custom code down here, maybe at the bottom. It's entirely up to you how you set this up. It's all code, and it's about you managing your code. So I'm going to put my global variables at the bottom, my custom methods down here as well. Okay, and now I'm going to go back to my design and double click background color. And I'm going to write set background. And use the light bulb to call that method or create that method. And yeah, it's going to go down here at the bottom again, which is really good. Okay, and I'll go back to my design, do the same thing with clear. Method clear is. Okay, and I'm going to do it with starburst. I don't want to write start burst. I just want to do that. And waiting for me to put stuff in there. Okay, it's just waiting for me to do stuff. So when I click these buttons, it's going to jump to my method and do what I want it to do. All right, what else am I going to do? So I've done all those buttons. Okay, the next one I'm going to do is this panel. This panel itself. Now it's not a button, so I'm going to right click. Okay, I'm going to go to events. I'm going to go to mouse, and then I'm going to go to mouse motion, mouse dragged, because that's how we draw in Photoshop. We drag our mouse. So that's what I'm going to go to, mouse dragged. So, events, mouse motion, mouse dragged. Okay. And I'm going to write my own custom method just called drag. I'm going to pass it EVT. Why? Because I might need to know where the mouse is. So that little parameter there is going to get passed to my custom method called drag. I'm going to rename this event because that makes it's better than a shorthand. Get ready for the comment right here. Okay. Now I see the time. It's 11:42. Obviously, I'm going to have to do some code copy paste to get this done. But I want to show you the setup for this. Okay. So that's me doing that as well. Now for this thing here, or sorry, for the panel, I'm also going to add another event, a mouse wheel event. So when I spin the mouse wheel, something's going to happen. And for that one, I'm going to make a custom code just called wheel with the EVT. Create the method. Okay. And then rename it, comment it, and get it ready to go. Okay. Okay, so mouse dragged, mouse wheel, the spinner. Let's do the spinner. With the spinner, I'm going to actually go to this one called state change, because the spinner is a weird one. So the state change is the one I'm going to use. Right click, events, change, change state. So when I change the state of this spinner, I'm just going to call my own custom spinner method. Create, jump to. Okay. So that takes care of all the buttons. Spinner. I don't need to do anything with that. No, the user's not going to interact with that. I've done two things with this thing, dragging and spinning my mouse wheel. Now it's time to do the ovals, or sorry, the radial buttons. For those, I can double click them because they kind of are like buttons. For these though, I'm going to do something interesting. I'm going to make a method called radio, and I'm going to pass it a parameter. The parameter I'm going to pass it is which of these so I'm passing it the filled oval rectangle button. I'm also going to pass it something from brushes at a certain spot in the array, spot 0. Why spot 0? Because spot 0 of the array is the filled oval, okay? So that's going to be a custom method, okay, where it's this J button, this radial button, and it's this brush that I'm essentially using. So you can see there, it's a little different, right? Parameter, and right, it's going to be a little different there. Now, why did I do that? Well, I did that so that now this is how it's going to go for each of them. So when I do this, I don't need to write another custom method. I'm going to call the same method with brushes 1 and the open oval. So I don't have different methods for each one. I'm going to use the same method. Okay, and then I'm going to ones. Brushes 2, and this is the filled rectangle. This is the open rectangle. Brushes 3. Almost there. And whoa, that didn't go the way I thought it would. Let's try that again. And 3D. Oh, brushes 4. And the arc for brushes 5. Okay, so sometimes software developers call this process wiring up your design. You're creating a connection between what you've done in your visual design and eventually what is going to be your own custom code. So once it's all wired up, you can now just focus on your own custom code right here, okay? I don't need to do more for that. So yeah, I'm going to cheat a little bit here. I'm going to cheat a little bit because in order to get this done, I have to go and copy and paste a bunch of code here. So unfortunately, we didn't have the time this week for me to completely do this thing, but I'm going to get it done for you guys right now. I'm going to add code to initialize container, some code to initialize the other code variables. All this code, right, that I have here. And that's my draw area. That's my spinner. Did I call it spinner? What did I call this thing? Brush size. That's what I call it. And this is, which is the first one? Filled oval. And draw area 3. This is going to be imported. This has got to be imported. This is a method we're going to write, which I will just create and then move out of here. How are we on time? We're running short on time. I'm just going to drop this to the bottom. Very short on time. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording now in a second here, because I don't want to keep you guys past, obviously, the time here. But I'm going to put all that code in there so it can go up on GitHub, okay? So all that code's going to go up on GitHub for you guys so that I can end the period, because the bell's about to ring and it's going to be 11:50 right here in a second. Okay, I am going to see you guys on Monday. So I'm going to wish you a nice weekend. And so have a good weekend. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And that's it for remote learning. And I know I didn't get a chance to finish this, but Graphics 3 was just an extension of what we'd already learned in Graphics 1 and 2. So I'm going to get that code all cleaned up and done and up online for you guys in the next few minutes. So it's done for you, so you can use it as a reference moving forward. Okay, everybody, have a great day. Have a great weekend. I'll see you on Monday.
Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
No bad joke of the week?